If you think Amazon suspends your account randomly, think again. Hey everyone, my name is Mario Simonian, the founding attorney of ESQgo, and today we've got a great video for you. Let's talk about how Amazon really flags seller accounts and what you can do about it. Let's get into it. Like I mentioned, Amazon doesn't suspend your account just randomly, right? And I think that may come as a surprise for most of you, but that is the case. And also, it's nothing personal, right? They're not suspending you because they don't like your green hair or red hair. It's just to protect their business enterprise, and also their clients. So just keep that in mind. One thing a lot of people don't know is there's 4 tiers of departments that'll either suspend you or review your POAs. For the first suspension or the first tier, we're talking about automated flagging. So this is done by their AI more often than not nowadays, or their machine learning. Think of this as sort of the bots. Okay, this is going to be the lowest tier of suspensions and usually the easiest to overcome. Usually these are things like performance sort of standards, those performance metrics, things like that. Second tier, we're looking at offshore teams. This is real humans, but offshore, either in Costa Rica, in Philippines, or India. Now, most of these responses that you receive from them, if they don't have the exact information that they're looking for, because all they're doing is looking at a checklist, if they don't have that, you're going to get that dreaded message, which all of us have received, which is going to be, your appeal does not contain the sufficient information, or we need more information, right? Sound familiar? Yeah, exactly. Now, that was a second tier. Third tier, we're talking about US based teams. This is now we're getting a lot more serious. This is team 3 or tier 3 out of 4. With this team, it's going to be more complicated suspensions such as counterfeit or IP issues. So keep that in mind. And then the 4th tier, the highest tier, which you don't want to have any issues with, this is going to be more of the brand registry, brand compliance teams, and also their legal compliance. So anything that has to do with repeated violations, you're going to end up here. Okay. And the real takeaway from all this is, you don't just need a good POA. You don't need to draft a good POA, but it's going to be a POA that you draft to the right audience. If you're writing a POA that should be addressing concerns raised by tier 4, Amazon's legal department or brand department, you're not going to get away with just drafting something very, very sort of anorexic or very simple. Now, what we've learned is, the higher the tier of the suspension or the department you're dealing with, usually the more evidence, the more documents, the more convincing information you're going to need to get the account reinstated. What does that look like? We had a client a few months ago that came in, and they were suspended for inauthentic suspension or inauthentic product. And this client had submitted about 3 or 4 POAs before they came to us. And I thought they did a pretty good job with their POAs and were pretty diligent in their efforts. What we learned is that this client was selling a product. I'm not going to tell you what the product is, but they were purchasing it from their supplier, and their supplier was purchasing it from the manufacturer. So you've got 3 different parties in this supply chain. And what we had to do is, the POA that did succeed, that was successful, we ended up submitting around 13 pieces of evidence or documents, exhibits, along with the POA. We had to establish the relationship from our supplier from our client going to the supplier, and from that supplier going to the manufacturer, showing that it's all legitimate and everything is kosher. From there, we also had to establish that our client was a real authentic business, right? So any corporation documents, any sort of bank information, we wanted to go ahead and establish that. But that's what we did with a situation like that. And again, the takeaway is, a good POA isn't just going to help. You need a good POA to the right department. And it takes experience and doing hundreds and dozens of these account suspensions and reinstatements to know which department are you dealing with and how to approach them. These are flags that we've seen that come up. This isn't anything that you're going to find in forums or any sort of Facebook group, but this just comes from experience. And this is information that Amazon has released. And obviously, this is all based on our educated guesses and our experience of dealing with them over the last 7 years with the law firm. In my experience, I've been dealing with Amazon for 12, 13 years now. And what you should know is Amazon has a score. They have a rating as far as how good of a seller or how safe of a seller you are versus how toxic you may be, right? This isn't the account health score. This is something internal. That's what we're assuming every seller has. Think of it as like their own credit reporting system that Amazon uses internally. And some of things, topics that come up with this is linked accounts. A lot of clients will come to us and say, "Hey, my account got suspended for being related or linked to another account." And what we'll always tell them is there's about 20 or 21 different data points that Amazon will look at. Keep in mind, Amazon owns AWS, so they've got no problem storing all of this information and all of these data points. And some of the things that they'll look at Amazon for making sure that they keep track of all these data points is things like your IP address, your business address, credit card information, phone number, the phone you use for SMS, for example, your browser cookies, MAC address, autofill data that each computer is most likely going to have separate ones, right? My autofill data isn't going to match yours. Even the time of day that you log in, they're going to go ahead and keep track of all of that. So again, we believe that there's 20 or more data points that they look at to identify whether seller A is related or connected to seller B and C. Okay. And what could happen in situations like this is, for example, if you've got a VA that used to work for a suspended seller and now has logged into yours, that can cause cross contamination. Doesn't mean that Amazon is going to right away suspend you for having that one data point, but think of that as just another red flag on your account. And obviously, none of us know how many of those red flags it takes to lead to a suspension. But obviously, if you could avoid it, then we definitely should. Next, we also believe that there's ASIN risk scoring for each ASIN, whether it's an ASIN that you created or it's an ASIN that you just jump on. And if an ASIN has had previous complaints, whether it's IP complaints on that ASIN or product reviews or I should say client feedback on that ASIN, then they're going to keep track of that too. And I'm pretty confident they have some sort of metric or KPI that they use, such as how many complaints did this ASIN receive out of 100 or out of 1,000 orders or units sold. So just keep that in mind. Now, along with that, there could also be keywords that are connected or on that listing that may result in an immediate suspension. If there's keywords such as listing a product as medical grade or as FDA approved or as organic when that's not really correct or true, either the bots will pick that up, the bots that we talked about earlier, or it could be done with an sort of human review. So keep that in mind. And of course, any issue that ASIN has, Amazon is going to keep track of that history. Amazon will not forget, thanks to AWS. They keep track of all this data, and I promise they store it. Next, pattern behavior. So this is the behavior that they monitor for all sellers. Again, this isn't publicly disclosed. This is just what we are sort of assuming is the case. Okay. So what we've seen in our experience is that Amazon will keep track and also monitor any sudden spikes in a SKU. So if there's a SKU that was selling 10 units a month and now it's doing 10,000 units a month, Amazon is going to keep track of that. Again, it's not a cause for suspension right away, but it's something that Amazon will have on their radar and monitor and maybe even dig in to see if there's any other issues with this SKU or ASIN. We've also seen accounts that switch from FBA to FBM. Sometimes that can also cause an issue or a flag. Again, this is behavior, right? And what's the reason for that? Well, think about it. If I'm selling something with FBA and all of a sudden I switch to FBM, that in itself isn't a violation. There's no policy that says you can't do that. But again, it could be cause for Amazon to look into it. If I was selling, maybe I was a bad actor. I was selling authentic goods when I was using FBA, but I got my hands on some inauthentic or counterfeit goods, and now I want to switch to FBM to ensure that Amazon doesn't have access or early access to these goods. It could be a flag. Next, invoice inconsistencies. We see this all the time. If you guys have your Amazon seller account under company ABC, under address 123 Broadway, make sure your invoices reflect that. You don't want your Amazon seller account to say this account is owned by company ABC, but your invoice say that it's owned by company XYZ. Okay, so keep that in mind. Those are all things that can cause Amazon to flag it and further investigate these issues. One of the other big things that Amazon looks at, and I don't think enough sellers realize, is every POA, every appeal that you submit, Amazon will keep track of that. And they do have software that'll go ahead and review everything and make sure that there aren't duplicate or very similar or exact copies of the POA being submitted. So keep that in mind. You never want to copy and paste a POA that you found in a forum or a Facebook group, or your best friend just got reinstated for the same POA. You don't want to submit that same POA. Amazon keeps track of that. Next issue we see is something that not a lot of people talk about, which is velocity correlation and seller network mapping. Now, what does this mean? If I've got several different seller accounts, there's nothing wrong with that. According to Amazon's policy nowadays, you could have and own multiple seller accounts. All of them must be in good standing. You must have a legitimate business interest or justification for having all those accounts, and those accounts can't be selling the same product across those multiple accounts. Now, what they'll notice is, going back to related accounts, if they ever see a situation of one account gets suspended and they've got maybe some data points that maybe hint to them that I may be related to accounts B and C, if they see a sudden spike in those dormant accounts, it's very safe for them to assume that maybe Mario was suspended here. He also owns those accounts, so he moved all of his inventory and business to these other accounts, because now those dormant accounts are now active. So that'll cause them to investigate. So keep that in mind. That's a velocity correlation across seller network mapping. Key takeaway for this is there are flags and metrics and a account score or account health score behind the scenes that Amazon may not show you guys publicly or in your own Seller Central portal, but they do keep track of that. And knowing all of this, I think, can help prevent these issues. And if you guys ever face these, or if you guys ever want to venture into this, to say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't because of that reason and that reason that Mario discussed. So just keep that in mind. The mistakes that trigger escalation. So if a POA failed, why did it fail, and why is it going to trigger an escalation to the higher tier departments? A lot of our clients that come to us and they've tried to DIY their reinstatement, they'll think that my POA wasn't approved because I didn't include this and that, or I did a weak job of doing this and I didn't include that document. But what we'll also see is there's other reasons that can cause the escalation. What do I mean by that? Templated POAs, which I mentioned earlier in the video. If there's template videos where your POA looks exactly like someone submitted 3 years ago, or your friend or neighbor or cousin submitted 2 weeks ago, Amazon keeps track of that. So if your POA looks like an exact copy or very similar to something that Amazon has seen before, then they're gonna go ahead and flag that. Okay. Or maybe it's a POA that you found on Reddit. Again, don't do that. Another thing is, in the root cause, if you're blaming Amazon and not taking responsibility, Amazon doesn't like that. Again, a POA is a compliance document. It's not, you're not here to make legal arguments or sort of justify your position of why you did this. I say this all the time. Amazon is its own sovereign nation. They have their own rules. What would happen if we were in court would be completely different than what happens within Amazon. So keep that in mind. But again, they want to see a compliance report. That's what a POA is. It's not an opportunity for you to go ahead and tell Amazon how you're completely right, how your business and your family is going to be starving and kicked out on the street because this account is suspended. They don't care about that. Okay. Unfortunately, they don't. And that's the truth. Next, if you have bad attachments, and you have no idea how many times we've seen this, where client will show this and say, "This is what I want to submit," and we're just looking at a document thinking, "What are you thinking?" They'll have documents that well, invoices, for example, which is one I remember recently. They'll have invoices that really don't look like invoices, and sometimes that's okay, right? For example, you could have a receipt that's completely fine, but what we've learned is if it's not a major national brand, the invoices have to look pretty legit, or at least have information in there that Amazon requires, such as the who issued the invoice, where is it going to, a date, invoice number, things like that, and obviously the products that are being sold or the goods that are being sold. We've seen documents come in where they'll show us two different invoices and they look completely different format. Can that happen in the real world? Yeah, we're all in business and we understand that sometimes the invoice structure can change because at the end of the year company decides that this invoice is structured. But in if the invoice goes from being type A to type B and then type A again, I think there's some red flags there, and those are things that you need to look out for. And again, invoice address for your company should match what's in Amazon Seller Central, excuse me. Same thing with the phone number. So all that information should match just to help Amazon show that, hey, this is an invoice issued to my company. Next common mistakes that cause the escalation is if you're submitting too many appeals, too many POAs, in a very short amount of time, Amazon's going to look at this and say, "Are you sure you understand what the issue is?" Right? Because why are you sending us so many issues? So you want to make sure that the timing of that is very um, on point and timely. Right? You want to respond whenever we have some additional information. Otherwise, you don't want to submit the same document again. You don't want to make the same arguments again, and you don't want to also tell conflicting narratives. You don't want to tell story A in one POA and then completely change your story. That's why I always say it's better for you guys to, if you are going to DIY it, it's better for you guys to spend a day or two and get all the emotions out and make sure you understand what the strategy is going to be going forward, and then craft the narrative, craft the POAs and appeals based on that narrative. Okay. Amazon doesn't always read these one line by one, right? So they, I'm pretty confident, I think all of us would agree that they've got some sort of AI that's reviewing these documents for form, for language, for all of that. So just keep in mind that not all POAs and appeals get handled and get read and reviewed by humans, but if they do, that'll usually also indicate you're in a higher tier department. What Amazon considers legal compliance. Amazon is its own sovereign nation. It's got its own rules. So just keep that in mind. Okay. And a POA is a compliance document. Amazon is here to protect their business, their enterprise, and also their customers. Doesn't matter what you're going through, what the emotions are. They're here to protect themselves. It also doesn't matter whether this argument or whether they could do this if we were in the quote unquote real world in court, right? That doesn't matter. All that matters is what Amazon wants, and that's what we need to focus on. And all of us have sort of said this for a long time, but it's worth repeating. In the eyes of Amazon, you're guilty until proven innocent. So just keep that in mind. And we've had cases where clients will tell us, I've got a trademark, right? Or this isn't trademark infringement, sort of IP arguments, legal arguments. And what we've learned is anytime you're making those legal arguments, usually it's not a bad start. We want to focus on what Amazon's policies are, how we help them understand that we understand the issue, right? That we've addressed it, and we'll ensure that it doesn't happen again. If we're able to do that, then that means we're in good shape. And obviously, the documents will go ahead and help. Now, takeaway from that is don't focus on what's legal and what's illegal and what Amazon did wrong. Focus on yourself, right? Focus on yourself, get the emotions out. And that's the best path to getting to a reinstatement very, very soon. So in closing, hopefully this video was helpful, but hopefully it also gave you a glimpse into how much is involved in looking at a suspension case and how much documents and how much insight you sort of need to have. This isn't information that you're going to learn in a 24-hour period, right? So hopefully this video did a good job of that. And if you guys need any help with your account reinstatement, any issues you're facing with Amazon, such as destroyed inventory or lost inventory at FBA, go ahead and schedule a free consultation with the link below, or give us a call at 424-363-6233. Thank you and enjoy.